I think when you don't know how to get to know someone and enjoy the company of someone without thinking that you have to go have sex, you lose out on something really special in a relationship.
God has put that boundary in there for a reason. It's because if you stay out of the boundary, you actually lose the best parts of what sex should be. Welcome back, guys. Pastor Steve and Pastor Sarah, welcome back to the channel.
Hello.
So today we're going to be tackling everyone's favorite topic to talk about, and that is sex. And we're talking about sex, baby. Yes. We're talking about Javen's favorite topic.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my
I'm married. That's right. So more specifically, it's sexual immorality. This word pops up a lot in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly in this verse, 1 Corinthians 6:18, it says, "Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body." Let's start with what exactly does it mean by sexual immorality? What is that? Yeah, what is that?
Go. You're better at
okay, so
theological.
If we go back to the idea of sin, right?
Yeah.
I think once again we've got to be so careful when we talk about sin, not just to draw up a list of like, these are the things you should never do. We should always kind of go, why? What's the heart of it? And I think sin is basically this idea of having wrong relationships with the things around you. So sex in a certain context is wonderful and safe and vulnerable and connecting. In another context, it can kind of dominate your life and kind of get you into difficult situations. So I think sexual immorality is the context that you are engaging in sexual activity, which is outside of God's kind of permitted and safe and nourished kind of area of life. Being in a intimate sexual relationship with somebody that is just using you for your body, or being kind of letting your sexual desires and your urges kind of control you and your time, being addicted to pornography, being addicted to casual sex, and not being able to actually have sex in this deep, committed, long-lasting, and kind of intimate kind of context. So our journey is not to kill those desires. Our journey is to learn to submit those desires and to live with those desires and express it in a healthy way. So I would guess that would be where we'd begin. Like, what do you have to add?
I might bounce off the word healthy, and I think something the church doesn't do well is actually how do you have healthy conversations around sex. I think especially working with young people, when you keep on just telling a young person, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and they don't know why, it's really hard because you're not actually helping them to understand what does faith have to do with it, or like what does who they are have to do with it. And the thing about human beings is the moment that you tell someone don't do this, what do we do?
Yeah, because you're not actually informing them to have a good relationship. You're just telling them to have a different kind of bad relationship.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. If we go back to this, sex before marriage, I think before God is like the best thing is to have it after, you get married. So that's something that, I do believe. But in saying that, I think we've definitely grown up with, and again, I'll just refer back to kind of like my journey with younger people is, they don't know why. So all they hear is don't have sex, or be pure, or don't relate, don't have sex before marriage. And so they don't know why. And so I think that's probably the bigger issue.
Some of them, when they do kind of make that mistake, they feel like this whole wall has been put up in front of them. They can never go to church anymore. Yeah. God will never want them around him anymore, and they're essentially doomed to live without God. I think that's the problem with what you're describing.
Yeah, so it becomes when you're not able to have healthy discussions around something, then really weird thing festers in the dark. And people feel alone in trying to understand who they are and trying to understand faith and trying to understand, is this okay? Is this not okay? They're dealing with it themselves because we're not having good and open conversations that are non-judgmental. So I would much prefer talking to a young person in church and being like, okay, what's actually happening in this relationship, and for them to be open to me, than for me to be like, you shouldn't have sex before marriage, and then they just close up and don't tell anyone. I think that's feeling alone and not understanding and feeling like you can't talk to someone. That's probably, I don't think that's the heart of God. I don't think the heart of God is to isolate. Like, that's why we just need to, first of all, if anything regarding this topic, is to provide better ways for people to talk about it, instead of just shutting people down and saying, no. I don't think that's helpful.
So why shouldn't young people be having sex before marriage?
So then we go to like, well, what is sex, right? What ultimately happens from it? You have the birth of it, like, it ends up being the birth of a child. I think that's a very big deal. Like, it actually highlights the significance of what, the act of sex does. It produces a baby.
Like life, yeah.
Yeah, life. And I think that, like, that in itself should actually show the significance of it. When you start doing it really casually, you actually lose just what it's meant to really represent.
It's actually sacred. That's what I point out. It's actually really sacred. And I would say, like, it's actually a really vulnerable place.
Yes.
Like, you don't feel like when you're, like, when it's in a place where it's really special and it's within a really kind of committed and deep and loving relationship, like in a marriage, it's not just something that's just to, like, for momentary kind of comfort and for, you're not using the person for pleasure. You actually feel really deeply connected with the person, and that's really special. And I think that's something that, like, if you are addicted to pornography, you just watch pornography, that is sort of like, it's almost like taking something that's really precious and giving you a really cheap fast food form of it, and you end up not being nourished. You won't be nourished by that, and you end up not even being able to, like, enjoy the really good parts of it. God has put that boundary in there for a reason. It's because if you stay out of that boundary, you actually lose the best parts of what sex should be. I would also say, like, there are other things in a relationship that help make sex really good. And I think sometimes when we date somebody and all we're thinking about is, what can I get from their body? What can I get from them to satisfy myself? You miss out on the really good stuff that makes sex better, number one. And number two, means your relationship is way deeper and way more meaningful than if it were just a sexual one.
When you enter into a relationship with someone, it's actually a very special and significant thing. And so when you kind of are just really casual about it, you don't end up looking at the other person and kind of being like, oh, they're a value, they're another person. What does it look like to respect them? As this female, this male, I think when you don't know how to get to know someone and enjoy the company of someone without, like, thinking that you have to go have sex, it actually, you lose out on something really special in a relationship. Yeah. And I think that gets lost in this culture as well.
It's worth waiting for, I would say. Someone who waited for it was worth it. It didn't diminish it at all. But if you are somebody who has, or somebody who has had sex before marriage, I think it's really important, once again, not to just throw judgment and shame at people, right? Like, I think it's so important to say that, God's grace is not beyond you. It doesn't mean you can't ever have a meaningful relationship anymore. I just think there's, perhaps there will be some work to kind of, you just have to kind of rediscover, I guess, what this really deep and meaningful and vulnerable part of a relationship is. Because, like, I guess once you are in that zone where you are in a married, kind of committed, long-term, loving relationship, it's actually something completely different than what anyone else would have prepared me for.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Thank you again. That's awesome content. And subscribers, thank you so much. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Cool. Thank you.
See you.